Those of you that know me know that I have a very strange sense of humor. So if something starts to sound a little peculiar, I mean it to be funny. Sandra and I have lived in the school district for 42 years. And we were warming up to move to Rose Valley. We only made it to the valley about 10 years ago. But it quickly turned into our favorite place. And we've lived in Wallingford and Swarthmore and other provinces. But we really loved Rose Valley. We just got old and we went out to Whitehorse. But I had given Ryan all my research on Charlie Schoen, and he said, you ought to come talk about it, and we need that record. And he said, well, and I agreed, and he said, well, what do you want to call it? And I said, we'll call it Rose Valley's Unlikely Financial Angel, and you'll see why. And I think you'll see why he doesn't figure very prominently in the public history of Rose Valley, because he's an outsider, he's different, he really didn't fit in. So we have a formal picture here to start with of Charlie and Lavina. And what he's well dressed. He looks Germanic. It's not clear that he is, but the name and everything else. And she looks very formal too. If you look carefully at her hands, she has rheumatoid arthritis. Her hands are all swollen. And she's not trying to hide it. It's just that happened. Okay? And it's just, we're going to get to a lot of pictures toward the end, and we're just going to kind of talk through. And people here who know as much as I do, I mean, I don't think many people know as much about the house, but I know, except for Andy, but I know an awful lot about Schoen, but not an awful lot about Rose Valley. So we may get into conversations as we go through, and they very graciously correct me. Okay, so let's talk first. In order to understand the contrast between Schoen and Rose Valley, you have to understand Rose Valley. So Quaker architect William Price purchased the 80 abandoned acres, formerly owned by Antrim Osborne, in 1900. Antrim made woolens, he's a Quaker, made woolens during the Civil War down at the old mill. Less generous people would say he was a wartime profiteer, but Quakers are pacifists, so that can't be. But he was working off water power off Ridley Creek, and he didn't convert to steam. And since he didn't do that, he couldn't compete anymore, and the stuff ended up being abandoned. So when Will buys it, it's not from Antrim, it's just been overgrown, and there are bats and all that kind of stuff. And he founds this arts and crafts community based on the utopian English village described in socialist William Morris's novel, News from Nowhere. William Morris is fun, and we're going to do a program on William Morris, but that's not tonight. A fantastic, he's the founder of the English arts and crafts movement. Hugely talented on doing different things. His wallpapers that he designed are still sold today. He was the architect for what's called Red House, which is a very, very famous house in England. And I don't know what we did with it, but I brought it. Where's the book?
It's an
the book's been taken. He decided he was going to print a book, why not? And it was going to be the finest book in the English language. And it remains so today. It's called the Kelmscott Chaucer. Redid Chaucer with illustrations, you know, and on stretched vellum pages. There were only 65 copies made. Here it comes. This is a copy. But it's called the Kelmscott Chaucer. 65 copies. Harvard has one. The Huntington Library out in California has one. We don't. We have a copy. And I brought it over today because I was giving it to Ryan to make up for the stuff I'm saying. So, it's got to happen. He writes, he's aside from an arts and craftsy guy, he's a devoted socialist. He wrote 1,000 articles about socialism, including this novel of what it would be like in this mythical English village when socialism reached its full fruition. And there's no laws, no money, no government, no peace force, no police. When the group gets together, it's called the moat. The group that lives there are called the folk, okay? And it's free love, Medicare for all, open borders, well, that's a different sentence. But he's ahead of his time. I mean, really, behind, it doesn't make any difference. And Will Price seeks to create that, where the workers live near the owners, where craftsmanship is not replaced by machines. And so it's established in July 17, 1901, as a protest against the Industrial Revolution. And then I have this quote from our website. They thought mass production lowered the standards of design, workmanship, and working conditions for the craftsmen and minimized their contribution to the finished product. Industry polluted and defaced the natural landscape, thus reducing the quality of life for all, yet profits from the factory system went only to improve the quality of life of the factory owner. You can understand that, you can relate to that. That is Rose Valley. The shop, however, it didn't work. The shop closed in 1906, and the association sold its land to Charles Schoen in 1910. So, a social experiment. These social experiments cost money. Where did the money come from? Well, one of the original investors, not the dominant investor, but he bought 100 shares. One of the original investors is Charles Schoen. Well, raises the question, who is Charles Schoen? That's why you're here. Okay? Born in 1844, he's a railroad industrialist. Okay? So, if we were to ask you today, what industry do you hate the most? Everybody sits there and thinks, is it cable? Is it the news media? Is it Amazon? What do you really hate? Is it Piggly Wiggly supermarkets? In 1900, there was no doubt who was hated the most by the people. It was the railroads. The railroads were just terrible. Well, that's where Charlie made his money. He's born in Delaware, raised in Wilmington. He marries Lavinia, and they have 5 kids. Edwin, and he worked in the companies, but he died early. Elsie, who marries Holly McClanahan. That's Will Price's architectural partner. That's the connection. And they lived in this house called Cherry Acres, which is on Pee Wee Hill. Today, that's the brick building that looks like the governor's mansion down in Williamsburg. I mean, it's not Rose Valley. It's a huge house. But that's where Cherry Acres was. Another daughter is named Lenore, and she marries Roy Jackson. He becomes a junior partner of the Schoen Jackson Company, and they lived at Roylandcroft. So you've got one house up this way, and one house down that way, and Schoen's house in between. He has another son named W.H., and he's a director of several companies, but we don't know anything more about him, and a daughter who married a doctor and moved to New York. What Charlie did, his first invention or design patent was for a pressed steel pocket. If you picture a flat car, there are stakes or rails that hold the logs on. And the rails go into the flat car floor, and he made that out of steel. And that was his first development. And he patents that in 1888. And then 125 patents later, he's making the whole boxcar, okay, out of steel. Used to make them out of wood or cast iron. Steel's lighter, stronger, lasts longer. And he became a big guy in this industry. And it was the Schoen Press Steel Company that was founded in 1895. And then there's a merger in 1899, and the other big steel railway company, which is an English company, merges with Charlie's. And Charlie ends up as president, and it's called the, where's my name? Pressed Steel Car Company of Pittsburgh. Okay, the merger of these two. Now, Fox's top U.S. officer and salesman was Diamond Jim Brady. You may have heard of Diamond Jim Brady. You may have heard of the railroads. We're going to talk about that. But you get a mild disclaimer, because shortly after the merger, Diamond Jim sells his whole interest, and he was a big shareholder, and goes on an extended vacation in Europe. And while he's away, some slick financiers buy up some more stock, and they get control of the company, and they kick Schoen out. So he's a railroad guy, but he's an engineer, he's an inventor, he's a manufacturer. He's not a financier, and he's not personally responsible for Diamond Jim. But the railroads, this is my favorite slide, the railroads and the Gilded Age. So let's return to those thrilling days of yesteryear and talk about what made the railroads so special. Because Schoen brings dirty money to Rose Valley. That's why we're talking about the railroads, because they were the most hated organizations in all of the United States, and Rose Valley was founded as a protest against that. But Schoen's daughter marries Holly McClanahan, he comes to help. So they were the first big business. They enabled national markets, they encouraged mass consumption and productivity, they promoted the growth of the steel and coal industries, and they created the modern corporation. They underwrote. I really worked hard on that verb. It doesn't catch it. They triggered. They're the basis of massive government corruption. They bought whole state legislatures and bribed officials to change liability laws and increase profits. What happened with the development of the Industrial Revolution, and particularly railroads, was the separation of possession of a good from ownership. And because when it was freight on board, FOB, and the railroad's hauling it across the nation, the railroad doesn't own it, they're the shipper, and the evidence of ownership is this piece of paper called a bill of lading. And small farmers and small merchants and others didn't catch on right away to how this thing works. So a lot of people got fooled into thinking they owned it, but they weren't watching where the paper was going and who held the paper, because the paper was the ownership evidence. The other thing they did, which is really cute, was stop, look, and listen laws. Everybody heard of stop, look, and listen?
Sure.
Okay. Do you know what it means?
Yeah.
Sure. A crossed arms, railroad crossing, okay? Stop, look, listen.
So you don't get run over.
Yeah, right. Well, whose fault is it?
Yours.
See, that's what they did. The railroad has to go through. So if the railroad hits you, it's your fault. If the railroad hits your cow, it's your fault. And they got these legislatures to change the liability law so the trains could go through. Because you can't be bogged down by every foolish person whose cow gets on the tracks. And the other thing they did, if they wanted to get from here to Media, and there's a line, they wanted to buy the line, get the government to condemn it so they could lay the track. And if they cut a farmer's land, 75% on one side, 25% on the other, tough. They're not compensating him for the lost quarter. And if his cows walk across the tracks and get hit, that's the way it goes. Well, it tended to upset people because this didn't seem fair. Okay? Then we got the intercompany competition. I'm on about the middle. The railroads gave discounts to favored shippers and deals to large folks, but they charged small farmers just outrageously, and competing railroad lines would just fix prices on small consumers. So the little guys getting squeezed badly. I mean, this, you like railroads, I like railroads, but they did not treat the public well. The singular accomplishment was the Transcontinental Railroad, 1869. Huge undertaking. The Union Pacific goes west from Omaha using Irish workers, whom they didn't treat well. And the Central Pacific comes east from Sacramento, using and abusing Chinese workers. So it's a different time. But workers didn't have much in the way of rights. If you're ever in Sacramento, I feel badly for you, but if you ever in Sacramento, in what they call Old Town, they have the California Railroad Museum, which is a spectacular museum about railroads and how they came to be and how they would orchestrate. It was like building and running an army to get the workers and everything on time and all that kind of stuff. It was a huge undertaking that united our great country, okay? They used tracts of land to encourage railroad expansion. By 1880, the railroads controlled half the land of the West. If you had a line, to get you to build the line, they would give you a checkerboard pattern, a square here and then square there, and they were sections. Sections are 640 acres, so the railroads started ending up with a lot of land, and if you wanted to live or build a factory or something else, you had to deal with the railroads. The association, I'm down second from the bottom, the American Railroad Association introduced 4 time zones in 1883. Before 1883, noon was when the sun was over your town. Makes sense. Well, everybody can't have noon. You can't have a railroad schedule. So they imposed the 4 time zones, which further endeared them to the because nobody told anybody how to change time. But the railroads were that strong. You want us, you got to do it our way. And then the financiers bought out the smaller companies during the Panic of 1893, and by 1900, the largest 7 railroad companies controlled 2/3 of the nation's railroads. You not only didn't like them, you couldn't avoid them. They were huge, and a lot of them acted in a corrupt manner. What about the people? Well, Cornelius Vanderbilt ran the New York Central by merging all these little railroads from New York to Chicago. Jay Gould would pump and dump stock, and railroad stock was as good as any. There's a bend in there, so I can't see who it is. Oh, J.P. Morgan. He took advantage of railroad bankruptcies in that Panic of 1893, which enabled the rich bankers to buy up and create railroad monopolies. Andrew Carnegie was also an industrialist, founded Carnegie Steel in 1892, but he dominated the steel industry. And what he believed in is called vertical integration. You start with mining the iron ore and the coal, you manufacture the steel, you make the steel, and then you use the steel in the end product. And he and Schoen go back and forth in the literature because Schoen is using the steel to make railroad cars, and Carnegie has invested, but said, you know, if there's that much money to be made in making the railroad, maybe we should make the railroad cars, vertical integration. And Schoen agrees to buy all of his steel. Hard not to, but buy all of his steel from the Carnegie companies, okay? And then you get down to U.S. Steel, which is this giant company when it was formed, the largest company in the world, controlled all the steel, 168,000 employees. And then our friend John D. Rockefeller, who we think of as Standard Oil, the greatest, this is a quote, wisest and meanest monopoly known in history, profited from his railroad investments, and that allowed him to force competitors out of business by undercutting them, and then he'd buy them up for pennies on the dollar. A captain of industry. Now, before we go on though, Andy Carnegie really turned out to be a philanthropist. He gave away his money, all of his money, at the end, and he built 5,000 libraries across America. He felt learning to read made the biggest difference in his life. 5,000 libraries. Classic, aggressive, terrible guy to compete against, but nice in the end. And I think the Rockefellers were equally generous. They didn't give it all away, but a lot of it. Okay, so we come back to Schoen. As I said, it's dirty money. But what happened in 1902, he loses control of his company. He retires and he comes to Rose Valley. Okay? Be near his daughters, be near hopefully grandkids. And then he hires Will Price to expand Osborne's 1862 farmhouse into the building, the manor house, which is called Schoen House. And he hires him in 1905. It takes a couple of years because it's quite extensive. Over time, he assembles 400 acres and he plants 4,000 apple trees. Now, he had more money than he could possibly spend. There was no income tax at the time. So I think this was a hobby farm. I think he just enjoyed doing that. We have a picture of that coming up. And then he hires Will Price to design and build his studio, which is his office, in 1909. And Andy, where's Andy? There's Andy. Andy lived in the studio. Sandra and I lived in the studio. It's so cute. We have a couple pictures at the end. He bought the Rose Valley Association acreage and he founded the Rose Valley Improvement Company in 1910. And he hires Price to design and build the 5 houses that are now on Porter Lane. Some people here live on Porter Lane. Okay? Nice houses. That you can't see, but there's a picture in the back here of those 5 houses. So what Schoen does when Rose Valley goes belly up, he buys it up. I think Swarthmore College called its loan. And I'm not positive whether Schoen lent them the money or bought the land. But he hires Price to build these 5 houses on spec. And they're gorgeous houses. I mean, they're really, really nice houses. But he also did other buildings all throughout Rose Valley. When Schoen buys more land, if there are buildings on that land, he has Price rehab them or expand them or restore them. So there's this running partnership. And while it's not mentioned here, all of the railroad commissions, in George Thomas's book, we have 3 copies over there if you ever want to read it, about Will Price. In the back there's an index of all of his commissions. And lots of them are railroad commissions. He designs railroad stations, he designed the Chicago Freight Terminal in Chicago. Those all came about because of his partner's relationship with Charles Schoen. Okay, so here's the list, and these names don't make any sense to me, maybe they'll make some sense to you. We're right here, Workman's Concrete Houses, McKee's Rocks in 1906, redid Bishop White House in 09, Pollard House, Orchard House, Lyndon Snyder House, the Red Barn and Stone Cottage in Todd Morton, another stone cottage, a tile garage and 2 stone cottages for the Lewis tract in 1916. When we break, there's 2 atlases on the wall, and if you go over and look at them and you find where Schoen's land is, and it's usually registered in his wife's name, which is interesting. Schoen was still alive when these were done. Next to it is called the Lewis tract, and it's about the same size. So clearly what happened sometime between 1909, which is the date of the atlas, and 1916, he buys the land from the Lewis tract and adds it to his own holdings. And then he got bored, and he goes back into railroad work, and he designs the pressed steel railroad wheel, which was his last invention. And he says he spent $1.5 million developing that wheel. And I thought he did it in a little studio that we lived in. I thought, oh boy, here we are. But he did it before he built the studio. He did it in 1906. Goes back to Pittsburgh, builds new plants. Carnegie puts money in. He gets the steel from Carnegie. And he's got 1 year of operation. And he produces 50,000 railroad wheels. Okay? Now, I was told by a railroad man that these wheels weighed 1,800 pounds apiece. It wasn't, you're jumping around with a spare tire. 50,000 of them. And then Anthony Carnegie says, we've been thinking about getting into the railroad wheel business. And we got all the steel. So he sells out. He sells out again. And he sells out to U.S. Steel in 1907. And the ultimate irony here is here at the bottom. He restores the old mill for the manufacturing of Phelps carburetors. This is the Rose Valley founded as the protest against the Industrial Revolution, and the last commercial use of the old mill is to make carburetors. Apparently in that era, if you wanted to improve what Henry Ford did, you buy a separate carburetor. And it was called a Phelps. He didn't design it. He just manufactured it. And it's F for flexibility, E for economy, P for power, and S for speed. So here's a picture of the Steel Wheel Company in 1906, 1907. And we think the guy with his back holding up the wall there is McClanahan. He tends to appear in a lot of these pictures, but that's Schoen dressed like a trolley car director in front of us, and then, you know, you see the black smoke. This is Pittsburgh in 1906. This is the ad, we have it here, for the Phelps carburetor. I won't read it to you, you can't read it off slide, but it's manufactured by the Schoen Jackson Company, right down in our little old mill. Okay? So what enabled us to know, this really gets fun. Schoen dies. They go to settle his estate. The requirement of the executor of the estate is you reduce the estate to cash as quickly as you can. Holly McClanahan owes his father-in-law $20,000. The executor wants the money. Holly doesn't have the money. In October of 1916, Will Price dies, Holly's partner, and he'd been sick before he died. So, and sometime in 1917, we haven't worked it out, Schoen dies. So Holly goes to Emma Price, the widow, and says, you know, Will was sick for a lot of that time, and we were giving him draw. So you own half the partnership, but it's not worth anything. Because when Will was out of it, you know, because Holly is a real estate developer, he's not really an architect. So Will stopped being productive, and it's just not worth very much. I'll just take it off your hands for you. Trust me. And then he turns to the Schoen estate and says, you know, we never billed my father-in-law for all that architectural work. So we thought we'd bill it now, bill the estate. You want the loan repaid, I'd like to be paid for my work. The partnership that I now own totally. And he hand writes out an inventory. And this is that inventory. And this is really cool. This is what researchers die for. Because he gives you the date and the month of what he does and what he thinks it's worth. Okay? So that's where we know he did Orchard House and Bishop White House and the Red Barn and the houses on the Lewis Drive. And then this is done on a legal size piece of paper. It totals 10,000 down here. And I can't get it. I'm not smart enough to get it onto one slide. So this is the bottom half of that same sheet of paper. And he gets down, there's the 10,000. And it's not enough, see? So he adds in interest. See that? Interest, 5%. Okay? And son of a gun, it comes out right at 20,000. You know, isn't that cool? I mean, it's just this history does this to us. Okay. We're going to go through some pictures now. This is Osborne's house, built in 1865, a stone farmhouse where Schoen House now stands, and Will Price expanded it. This is unique too because it's based on a pattern book published by America's first architect, A.J. Downing, Andrew Jackson Downing. And this is design number 8, planned for an Italian cottage. And it's just amazing. It's a description of the core of Schoen House. And so he took this and he hires Will Price to build a house. Now Will Price knew how to build mansions. He'd done them up on the main line. But they didn't want a mansion in Rose Valley. That would not be right. So he built a tribute to the arts and crafts movement. Big house. But it's not grandiose. So here's, again, this is in the beginning. This is shown, we think the white blouse is his daughter, Holly's wife. And there are 3 or 4 dogs. And we think the main reason we have pictures is because they took pictures of the pets. So this is out on the land. This is the Bishop White House. That's the Osborne farmhouse and the barn. And Will Price writes that the barn was too close to the house to ignore and too new to tear down. So he stuccos it, he puts a cupola on it, and he turns it into a pretty building, a pretty barn. Okay, this is the Schoen Holdings. And when Prue Churchill moved out of the manor house, she put this up for auction. It was at Pook and Pook out in county. I wanted it. The museum wanted it, but I didn't know the museum existed, and they won. And so it's owned by the museum, and it's on display at the school in Rose Valley. But these are his 400 acres, and it shows, if you get the big one, it's about as big as that picture over there. It shows you which kind of apples were in which orchard. And it's really cool. And if you picture it, it's a little bit hard to picture what he did, but you go up here to Pew Park where the stop sign is, right below the railroad tracks. Everything on the right, on Rose Valley Road, all the way around to Brookhaven, is Schoen land. And he even owns a couple of sections across Brookhaven. So he owns the old mill, he owns the Todd Morden mill, and he owns what today is called the mills in Rose Valley. He owns that far down. I mean, it's a very, very substantial amount of land, and we have the full record. And again, this is listed as though it belongs to the wife. Now, there must have been something peculiar, some reason why he put it in his wife's name. Trusting soul. Okay, so Will Price does a drawing to show the architects downtown this great commission that he's gotten. And this is the drawing dated in 1904. It's again from Mrs. Schoen. And this is Schoen House before it was built. But it is exactly what was built. And there's 3 tiny exceptions. And George Thomas gave this to the Athenaeum. This is down at the Athenaeum. They were kind enough, when the University of Pennsylvania owned it, to take it out of the frame and take a slow lapse picture of it. So I have this on giant Kodak paper, and it's hanging over the mantle in the manor house. And you know, you have a glass of wine, you stare at it, you think it through, and there's only 3 differences, okay, and I'll point out, you can't tell, but I know. There's a close on the far end of the house where the pergola comes in. That's a stone wall called a close, and on his wall he has a tile top. And as built, it's flat. There's no tile there. There's a stone bench. I think we'll see a picture of the stone bench at the end of the formal garden. And he's moved it to the front, to this side of the pergola, to show it off. And he did the same thing with a fountain. There's a gorgeous concrete fountain done by Henry Mercer's brother that was in the center of the formal garden. And he just brings it forward because he wanted to show off that he had that too. So here's Mr. and Mrs. Schoen. He's dressed in the back. This is the water tower. There's a 3-story water tower to provide the irrigation for his 4,000 apple trees. And then there's a pergola, we'll get better shots, going from the water tower to the house. Holly with Pat is in the front seat with the driver. I don't know what kind of car it is, but it's a neat car. And that's why the house is being restored. Okay, this is Mrs. Schoen, and this is the porch off the master bedroom. It's looking toward the water tower. It's kind of over the front door, and the house is clearly being rebuilt. And then there's somebody's boot. If you're really astute, there's a boot there, probably Holly McLanahan. This is Mr. and Mrs. Schoen. I'm looking, I thought there was a pet. I think there's a baby dog there in the front. And there, oh, there's 2 dogs. That's absolutely true. There's a bigger, I knew there were dogs. This is the entrance to the well. They built, between the barn and the water tower, a 2-room stone well. And they had kind of a ground height roof over it. We'll see a couple more pictures of it. But they're examining the well, so of course he's dressed to the nines. And here we are out amongst the corn stalks, and the dog, Mr. Schoen, Mrs. Schoen, and the daughter. The daughter tends to wear white, Mrs. Schoen tends to wear black. So in any event, they're out, in the corn stalks. This is the new barn. Okay, see the cupola and the stucco. This is what he did to fix up this 1862 barn. And you can just see the restored manor house, Schoen house. And this is Mrs. Schoen on the front porch. What they did in that era, I think that's the edge of the barn, although that's very peculiar off the porch. I'll have to think about that. They would take down the glass in the summer and put it up in the winter, so the help would move. It's now permanent, but the real front door is right back here, and these are side entrances to the porch with dog. So this is the left-hand side of the house, and what Price did was punch out in the living room and the parlor 10 feet and build that chimney stack. And there's a duplicate on the other side, which makes it challenging to decorate the room because there's a big rectangle, and then in the middle there's 10 foot added, which was Saunders' challenge in decorating the house, and she did it magnificently. But this also has Will Price's traditional corner buttresses. You're shooting right on, but there's a buttress between the two arches that is tile capped. Will Price comes back from England talking about these strange red roofs of crockery, and he starts building lots of houses in Rose Valley have tile roofs. And then he's got a little, it's hard to see, but on the corner of the concrete wall coming this way, the stone wall, there's a little teeny buttress down at the base. And it's kind of like Big Brother, Little Brother. This is an interior shot. This is the punch out of that same spot. This is the chimney stack on the left side of the house. Paula's great-grandfather did the carving. John Main was stone and wood. So the stone is carved, and the wood up on top, that's called the folded linen pattern. And at the very top, there's a band that duplicates in wood. They're a nut tree, like acorns or something off of walnuts, off a tree. And then there's the same band down at the bottom in stone. You can't tell, but holding up the mantle are two ram's heads carved in stone. And for shepherds, that's big stuff. So we thought he knew about this. There's a beautiful pattern on that workbench. The old-fashioned ingle nook where the kids would sit by the fire and read the books at night. And then going up along the side of that bench is grape trees. And it's carved into the wood. You see how it comes up and curves and goes out. They modernized, or tried to modernize, the house at one point, and they chipped all that grape tree off.
Oh,
so you can't take the paint off. It was all painted too. And the paint came off everywhere nicely, and you had this beautiful wood, but not where they chipped it. So we had to leave that painted white. So here is that pillar, that very pillar. See, this pillar is down at the old mill being made. And you can tell because it's the same books cut in the side, and that's the grape tree going up. Isn't that cool? You know, and they are here building my house. Now, this is shown under the elm tree, whatever the tree is, but he's got a dog at his feet. And this low roof in front of him is over the well. The well was dug into the ground about ground level, so the roof doesn't have to be very high. The back of the barn, modernized. And then he's got, we call it a cabana, there's an apartment on each side of that a door with a dome over it. So he's got 7 or 8 places for him and the help and everybody else to live on this 400-acre estate. And he's once again, he's always dressed. We have no, except for one, we have no pictures of Schoen in a bathing suit. Okay. This is a shot taken from Pee Wee Hill, the McClanahan house, up the other side of Vernon Run. And that's Bishop White House. That's the old barn and the old 1862 stone house. So clearly the McClanahans were here first. And of course there's a black dog. And then here, with a white dog, this is going to be on the exam, okay? White dog. Here's the Bishop White House, the restored barn, and the completed Schoen house. Now, there was this guy, this childhood friend of Will Price's, named Henry Troth. And Troth was a photographer, and he loved to take pictures, and he loved to take pictures of Schoen house. So we have hundreds more, you know, Schoen house from this angle, under construction, all this kind of stuff, that are all down at the Athenaeum, because George Thomas bought, when he was a graduate student at Penn, he bought the files, the archives of Price and McClanahan, kept them, and then 5 years ago, 10 years ago, gave them to the Athenaeum. And Paula and Morris and I went down, and we made a deal with the Athenaeum. We would tell them what the pictures were of, and they would make and give us a digitized copy of the glass slides. So it's really cool. And of course, he had lots of other ones of other projects, so we would say it's in Rose Valley or it's not in Rose Valley, and if it's in Rose Valley, here's what it is. And they were thrilled. They were thrilled with our knowledge. We're thrilled with George Thomas. George Thomas is thrilled with us. Okay, this is where he's not in formal attire. He took his coat off, and we think those are grapes, but it's the first squeezing of the grapes in the barn. And I used to think they were making apple cider, but those aren't apples. Those are grapes. They're making wine. This is one of, we discovered this Wednesday. This glass slide has been flipped. See, and on these glass slides, you really can't tell what's top and what's bottom. So really, he's on the other side, because this wall in the old barn was on the other side, and there was an open part, and that happens sometimes. So those who are grading the quality of the research, see, we're off by one. Okay, this is Schoen's office, built in 1909 from scratch. Schoen house, he expands Antrim Osborne's house. McClanahan's house up on Pee Wee Hill, which has been torn down. They expanded an existing house. Royland Croft is built from scratch, and this is built from scratch. And it's so cute. I think we have a couple pictures of the inside. And he built it as his office. It's halfway from his house to the old mill. And it's just as cute as the bugs here. Okay, these are 2 postcards. There's a series in black and white that are architectural renderings, and this is the old water tower. And there's a series in color. And what's so cool about that, they're both in the water tower. But you see, we could reconstruct the wood and the fencing and everything of the water tower from these pictures. So, because the wood was all rotted, and we redid it. But what is so cool is in the red, even though you can't read it, it calls it Rose Valley Farm. And before we came, they'd forgotten that that was the name of the land. The house was always Schoen house. But it's so nice to come across postcards that say, yes, but the land was called Rose Valley Farm. So we gave copies. This is a very bad picture. The better picture is up there. There's better light and sun. It's of the spec houses that Will Price designed and Schoen paid for. And then this is because this is a research lecture, and these are all on the exam. The museum has a great website. The Athenaeum has great slides. There's a biography of Schoen down at the Delaware County Historical Society. The railroad book's got a full chapter on his impact on the American railway freight car. There's a 40-pound book over there you know, imagine how thrilled you'd be to have a coffee table book on American freight cars, but Schoen's in it. Holly McClanahan's papers are a winner to it, including this wonderful handwritten inventory of all the stuff they did. There's another letter, my lecture's not on Holly McClanahan, from the Secretary of the Treasury, dated 1916, that says, you know, I'm writing you, sorry to have to do this, but it appears you haven't paid any income taxes. And that's just when they put it in. So it's entirely possible Holly lost the bill or decided it wasn't worth his time. There's a book about Andrew Carnegie, there are lots of books about Andrew Carnegie. This is by a guy named Wall, and he's got the letters with Schoen and Carnegie on the obtaining the steel and the deals for buying the companies and that sort of thing. And then there's this book down at the bottom on Teddy Roosevelt called Theodore Rex that came out in 2002. And my son was reading it for the fun of it. He says, Dad, Schoen's in the book. And there's this wonderful story. I'll close on this. Well, I got some more pictures. There's this wonderful story. Remember, Schoen loses control of his company. So years later, he's in Atlantic City with a couple buddies, and they're whooping it up at some bar, and in walks the Attorney General of the United States. Okay? And the Attorney General of the United States, when he was in private practice, was the lawyer representing the guys who took Schoen out of his company. So there's words exchanged. And then it describes there's an altercation where the Attorney General is roughed up. But it goes out of its way to say Schoen wasn't involved in the altercation. He clearly triggered it. Because he starts denouncing the AG, and the AG makes the mistake of coming over and saying, no, there are ladies present, don't talk about this, and it gets worse. And then it says, and the drunks, meaning Schoen and his friends, wander out of the bar saying, hurrah for the trusts. You know, what fun. And you wouldn't think, you couldn't find that. You know, if you were researching Schoen, it would never come up, but it's fun to have. And of course, all of this stuff is here. We got the books over here. We've got files if you want to come look. And this is the signal where we're going to switch from the Academy. Yeah, Maxwell Parrish. Maxwell Parrish, in his fantasy pictures, uses blue. And they became very, very popular, and they think that's the color first perceived in the womb. Who knows? But okay, so these pictures were taken in 2008 when we were restoring Schoen House, and I think it's not an intrusion on the current owners to show you pictures of the outside, and so we're just going to run through them. There are other pictures, but not from me. So this is that same shot of the punch out on the left side. You can see the stone buttresses, and the glass is up because the glass is now permanent. I could be wrong. There was some thought, because that front is added, that if we weren't careful, the whole front would come off the house. That's what happened at Pee Wee Hill. The whole front was coming off the house. And we put 100 cubic yards of concrete under the front. It was hollow. There was a crawl space underneath. And we said, you know, we don't need this. So it's not moving anymore. Okay? So this is the back of the house. It's the same punch out. And we're enclosing a porch on the back side of the house. This is another shot along there. These pillars, there's an architectural name for them, that they're really Coke bottles. They're round, they get bigger, then they get smaller, then they break out at the base. And there's one built in the house itself, and they're duplicating those. And the stonemason said that was quite a challenge to do. This is a shot from Traymore. Traymore's the development next door, and it's shooting across the garden. Everything, if you start at the very back, that's now a garage, and next to it is a family room, and those we added. The house wasn't big enough for the two of us. So, but Schoen's house ends where that breakout is under the second roof. Okay? And the water tower. And the water. It's such a glorious thing. Gertrude Jacqueline, we can't prove that Will Price met Gertrude Jekyll when he was in England. We know he met William Morris. But Jekyll writes, they pronounce her name another way. Jekyll. Jacob, I don't do flowers. She writes, you can't just have a pergola. The pergola has to go somewhere. So we see it comes out and it picks up and goes to the water tower. And here it is again. It's such a nice shot. And this is that close, that wall, that it doesn't have the tile top. Not that you care. This is the inside again. This is that inglenook. We've replaced the fire brick. We have Samuel Yellon andirons. And you can see how gorgeous the wood was. And then you get a much better shot of the carving. One of the great mysteries of the stone carving over the mantle, if you can remember, because it's going to be on the exam, in the old picture, there's two ribbons across. There's no wording carved in the ribbons, but right in the center of that stone, and they disappeared. And then there's a new uncarved lip, about 4 inches deep. There was a board here, but it's about 4, it goes across the top, and it's not carved. And we think what happened was this gorgeous fireplace didn't draw because the opening was too big, and they're trying to close off, take up a little space. This is the studio, and down here on the lower left side is a sundial, but there's a picture that the museum has, and it's got number 102 of the Schoen steel railroad wheel there instead of a sundial. So he had one of his inventions. We think it was a well. We were going to move that a little bit, move here, move there, and the stone just never stopped going down. So we think it was a well, and that's how they kept and abandoned it. This is the inside of the studio when Sandra and I lived there. There's an inglenook there. His desk was about where the sofa is, and the house is up there. If you curl around behind the guest house, that's the 3 condos down in the crook of Rose Valley. If you go up Possum Hollow Road and look back at the guest house, it has windows just like this. 3 stacks of windows, and Will Price was copying that when he did the and then these gorgeous lamps that aren't original up there. The Souls went on a world tour and looted great monasteries and brought back from a Muslim church these mosques. Thank you. Brought back from us these 2 lights, and they were black as soot when we moved in, and we set them out to be rewired and all that kind of stuff. And the people who worked on them said, in the mosque, these would be shiny as they could be. So we had them shined up, and we even put a little light down in the belly of the pot so you can see its tool. And then it's in Arabic up there around the top. It probably says death to the infidels. If you go out to Doylestown, where Mercer is, Mercer has one of these. And his is flipped. He's got the belly down and the point up. And you can do that. And there's 3. It's a tripod that's holding it up. I don't know. This is how we found it. And this is the inglenook fireplace in the studio. It's got a beautiful balcony. Schoen's desk is where the red sofa is, and the staircase upstairs. It's it's 22 feet high. It's a 2-story office, and you want to go up to the balcony and look down and say, "Release the lions." And we thought once of having a Henry VIII dinner, because you could have a long table and a gorgeous room. just gorgeous. 7-foot high wainscoting. And the drawing, see how it's got that gentle arch on the top? His drawings for doing that are down at the Athenaeum. So you could go see how Will Price was going to do it. Another shot.
Very graceful.
We don't, and then you can see there's carved beams up in the ceiling and exposed beams. Andy and I want to move back. This is we took down Schoen's barn, Antrim Osborne's barn, because it intruded on Tremor, and it wasn't part of what we promised. But we liked the idea of a barn so much we built another one. So this is maybe a fifth the size, and we were able to salvage 2 or 3 architectural things from the original barn. This is another shot of the barn from Tremor. The water tower is off to the left. Again, the barn. See the door in the center? There's an arch on the center door. They invented the car. You may figure this out. They invented the car after the barn was built in 1862. Saul, and this is not on Saul, Saul was general counsel to the Packard Motor Company's facilities in Philadelphia. So he had Packard. And they needed to get it in the barn. And the entryway was for horses and cattle and stuff like that. So they added retroactively this 3-part folding door. You know, then you pull a latch and the one hinge goes one way and it slides across. And we made a place for it in the new barn. There's no really reason to have that door there, but we salvaged it because it was so cool. And this is the uncovered base of the well. See, that's there's no roof on it, but that's where the well is. This is the left side of the house. And that wall, it's got a blocked off door, that's the 1862 wall. Price punches out 10 feet, and on the back he had servants' quarters. But that one wall with 3 windows on top and 2 and a door is left over from 1862. So I love the water tower. And I love the punch out. And this is a shot of the garden as it's starting to come in. And again from Tremor. And this is the stone bench. This is at the end of the formal garden, built in 1904, never touched, near as we can tell, never repointed. And there's gorgeous carved knuckles of stone underneath holding up the bench. This is the formal garden coming back, shot of the barn. More of the formal garden. See, we just keep taking pictures like man. Will Price talked about the house growing up out of the soil. It's a very masculine house. And in Mercer tiles, you know, Will Price is one of the great early customers of Henry Mercer. Yeah, that's the last one. See, the gardens have really come in. Now, this is 10 years ago. But what fun. Thank you. Would you have